Hello, here I am with Sarah Blackford. Hi, Sarah. Thanks very much for joining us.
Hi, Jack.
Hello, hi. I'm Jack. I'm one of the editors here at Nature Careers, and the point of this session is to run through a handful of CVs that members of our audience have quite kindly sent over to us. I've anonymized all these CVs and changed identifying details, so you won't be able to work out if there's anyone you know. But the overall point of these things is that you can run through the scientific details in them, and we can perhaps talk about the layout, the format, how different information is presented for different jobs, and that kind of thing. Is that broadly right, Sarah?
Yes, I think what we'll do is we'll build on the first video, which is more of a presentation, as you know, and some of the strategies that I spoke about, and hopefully then be able to apply them as if somebody had come in to see me to talk about their CV and to see if they can revise it more in line with the job spec.
Superb. Right, excellent. Okay, without too much further ado, I'm going to start sharing my screen and we can try running through these things if that's all right with you. And now we're looking at a job posting posted by the Crick over in London.
I think I've highlighted, and you've highlighted as well, some of the key requirements. So this is what you need to do, as if treating it like an exam. You look for keywords, you look for the key activities and responsibilities that are involved in the project. So I can see immediately under summary, about 4 lines down, it says that the post holder will be involved in a variety of projects with substantial scope for academic judgment, originality, interpretation, and presentation of results with full authority for many aspects of the work. So you can see this is definitely a senior post, and it's highly investigative. It's almost, you know, the next step would be as an academic, you know, as a somebody who would apply for a role as an academic. So this is really great because it means it's giving the person lots of research and investigative opportunities to, you know, become a more senior person and take on these responsibilities, as well as you see guiding and supervising junior scientists, taking part in multi-scientific interactions. All these things are very helpful for anyone who's thinking, you know, they want to get a career in academia. Because I would say this is an investigative, social, and actually functional CV. So if you saw the first presentation, we categorize different jobs into different areas. So investigative functional is obviously something that goes very much along the lines of a postdoctoral position. But this one is not mentioning the functional research technical skills straight away. And of course, if you think about it, when you go to the more senior levels, you know, you're not in the lab, you're not doing those functional things. So the fact that they're not highlighting that straight away means that, you know, you're going to have to position yourself in a very highly senior type sort of investigative scientist perspective and stance.
So is a suggestion here that this is maybe a second or third kind of postdoc position
I would say
rather
so.
than, and so
Rather
maybe
than
you're
junior.
right, and you're managing PhD students and you're kind of helping the PI lead research rather than just working in the lab the whole time.
You're a colleague, definitely a colleague. You're undertaking collaborative projects. You're at the interface with the clinical team. So basically, you're almost like the deputy of the research group, I would say. And this is what the PI wants to do. So they're empowering you to take on these responsibilities. And it's great because you're going to create a good independent profile for yourself, and also hopefully get lots of publications and put you in a really good position for then applying for academic posts or group leader positions. I think those summaries are great, aren't they? Because they really give an overview and a feel for the post. And then obviously you've got this listed key responsibilities if you scroll down the page where you've highlighted them in blue.
Okay, great.
Now, I think what's important here to say is that, you know, you don't have to go down the whole list and tick everything off. And if you can't tick one of them off, you don't apply for the job. Because employers will tell you that as long as you really hit about 50% of these, then, you know, if you really think you can develop into this role, if you can see yourself in this role, then I would definitely go ahead. And if you can network beforehand, obviously, you know, contact the PI in advance, say that you're very interested in the role, you know, is there any questions that you have for them, or you might speak to a senior postdoc and so on. It's just, you know, this will be what you're doing on almost like a day-to-day basis, but it gives you a feel. So the things that they're most interested in are going to be at the top of the list, and then it kind of, you know, goes down in, you know, maybe the number of times that you have to do that, or the, you know, the importance of that particular activity.
So, for example, on occasion, might there be some could an individual perhaps not have any experience working with clinical teams, right? But they might have experience in all the other.
Yeah, they might have worked in other teams. What they're looking for are people who've worked in collaboration. I mean, obviously, if you've worked in clinical teams, then that's great, because that's the kind of people that you are going to be working with, and you're used to their language and you're used to speaking to them. And it is quite key to this position, you know, but you maybe, you know, have not represented the PI internal meetings, perhaps, you know, or I don't know. Yeah, providing, I mean, I suspect that most people, if they have been a postdoc before, will have actually experienced most of this anyway. So
sure, but the overall point is that this is a debate, right? It's not, you don't necessarily have to have rich experience in every key responsibility in the job description, as long as you can demonstrate that you're capable of gaining that experience in the long run. Is that right?
yeah, because it's a wish list, isn't it? I mean, somebody's written all these things down. It's a wish list for them. You have a wish list for what you like in a job, but you're not going to get absolutely everything you want. You won't have everything, and all the other candidates won't have everything. You'll have different things to offer. And, you know, when you go to interview, or, you know, if your CV is successful, then it'll be your personality, it'll be the way you express yourself, and other details that will come across that will then determine whether they take you or they take somebody else.
All right, great. Well, that's a run through of this particular job description. Let's move on to the CV that was aimed to address this job description.
Mm-hmm.
So, Sarah, what were your sort of immediate impressions when you looked at this CV, bearing in mind that job description we just looked at?
Yeah, and I think it does a good job. I really do. I think it's very much an investigative CV. You can see that on the front. It's very much focusing on education, research, and there's some functional skills in there. So the person who would be reading it at the Crick Institute, they will be looking for things like oncology and immunology. They will be looking for clinicians, and that is in the current position. So if they did a quick scan of this, they will probably see some keywords there that would stand out to them, and they will be interested to read for more detail. So that, I think, is a positive thing. On the slightly more negative side, what I would say is be careful when you write a personal profile. I think this one, it's not really focusing on the job description particularly. It's quite focusing on techniques that aren't necessarily going to be very relevant to this position. And also it detracts from that current position. So what I would say is you could even take that out, because that's the sort of information you put in your covering letter anyway. And then you have your current position, maybe call that research experience, and then continue on with your PhD project, and then bring your education further down. So you're kind of consolidating all that information together. And even where you've got the all these lovely functional skills, maybe subsection them then into technical skills. So you have research skills, which is the investigative side, which is what I spoke about in my previous recording, and then get your functional skills separate from that.
So that's the thing I've just highlighted here, right? These functional skills. These are things like cytokine and chemokine analysis, ex vivo characterization of something, those kind of, you know, dense scientific lab work, specialist skills. Because again,
really they are important, but the further you go along in your career stage, and the more you become more investigative and moving towards like managing and overseeing and thinking about where the research is going, and there's less emphasis then on your, you know, detailed. I mean, they're still interested in them, but you don't want to highlight them and put too much emphasis on them.
So we mentioned in the when we were looking through that job description, right, that this is maybe a second or third postdoc position, maybe before you become a PI, hopefully. Whereas maybe the CV is addressing kind of a first That's, you know, an earlier postdoc position where it's more focused on the lab work. Is that a fair kind of
Yeah,
characterization?
it probably is. You're absolutely right there. That this would be more, and when you look at the person here, you know, they've only just finished their PhD. They don't have too much research experience. So yeah, they'd probably be going for a more junior position.
Got it. Thank you. All right, I'm going to scroll down now. So we're moving into sort of the final year research project section, and
Yeah.
into this pair of summer internships. What do you think of that section?
Well, again, you see, I think this really does sort of show that the person's not that much further on from their degree that they feel that they ought to put these internships in. And I think for a more senior position, you'd have moved on from this now, because these were just snapshots, almost, you know, a snapshot of the lab. Will I like research? You know, the sort of testing and really doing some probably quite basic work. So unless it's something that's very relevant to perhaps the functional skills and the techniques that the person is looking for the lab, then perhaps, you know, you don't really need to spend sort of nearly half a page putting in that information.
Great, thank you. And we do have these sort of funding notes here, right? And I know when we spoke about this before we started recording, you liked these. I think it's valuable having these sort of funded things because it shows value.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I think what you could do is you could take that out and you could put it in the awards and grants and actually add to it. You know, you have them in reverse chronological order, or put them in, you know, what kind of scholarships they were. And actually, you can see here the Inspire Summer Scholarship is in there. Put the Delight one in as well, and really consolidate that section to show that you're a person who will go for competitive funding, because again, that's a more senior researcher type activity.
Great, thank you. Okay, and then scrolling down further, we've got this teaching experience, positions of responsibility. What are your sort of thoughts about this stuff?
I think for the role that we're looking at, which doesn't require any teaching, I would take the teaching out, because, you know, it sort of detracts in a way from the fact that these are positions of responsibility, and that would then add to the person's research side to show that they would be happy and they would be comfortable working across teams and speaking to clinicians and other people who, you know, don't necessarily speak their language, and being able to relate to them. And actually, you know, there is, I don't know if you want to scroll right down to where you have some volunteering right at the end of this CV. There's almost been tacked on. Be aware that if you don't get paid, it doesn't matter. Still put it in things like your work experience, or try to consolidate it. Try not to have one piece of experience just floating around. Try to get it into a section if you can.
And so I just want to make sure I understood that. So this PhD student demonstrator role, you delete that entirely, or would you just simplify it into maybe one line or combine it with something else?
I think I'd simplify it. I'd reduce it down. It is a position of responsibility. It shows that you got involved and that you were taking responsibility for, you know, these undergrads. But, you know, I mean, these are sort of mini leadership roles, aren't they? And I think they all add up. You know, if you then get some experience that supersedes that, then maybe leave it out completely.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, is there anything else?
Well, I would just like to say that what I would suggest here to somebody is I would put those awards and grants further up the pecking order. I would try to get them on the front page, or at least at the top of the second page, because they're very important. And again, with the publications, I would at least on the front page draw attention to them with the research experience, and just say, see appendix for publications and presentations, and move that onto page 3. Don't interrupt your referees, and have 2 full pages plus your academic record of publications. That is the convention. That's how academics will do it. So you follow their convention.
Okay, superb. And then is there, you know, anything else, just sort of first impressions when you're looking through this? Any other sort of, I don't know, maybe cosmetic things, or
I don't like fonts, I have to say. But that's just a personal thing, isn't it? But I think, you know, what I like about it is that there aren't great big white spaces, and they filled up the full, you know, pages. I mean, when you take these publications out, you don't want to start on a second page or go halfway down a page. And, you know, if you're going to use 2 pages of, you know, fill them up. Appendix is different. Obviously, you can stop halfway down a page. But I think what you end up is with these sections, and you can move them around. If you wanted to put your education on the front page and put it first, that's fine, and followed by your research experience, or you can change it around. But just make sure that what you've got on the front page, that is the most important and relevant evidence for this particular position.
Thank you. Great. Okay. I think let's move on now to the next job description and
Yeah.
the CV that matches that, if that's all right. All right, we'll be back in just a second. All right, we're going to run through this job description here for a scientific officer that's up on my screen now. And then we're going to look how that same person changed their CV in order to address that job and what else they could have potentially done differently. So Sarah, first of all, talk to me about this job description. What do you think about it? What are you looking for when you run through it?
Okay, so this job is very different to the one before. Well, I say very different. It's very functional. It's functionally orientated. It's about lab techniques. It's about methodologies. There's loads of mention here of translational research projects, functional experimental work, functional experiments, cell lines, drug screening, and so molecular biology, 2D tissue culture. So there's a lot in this advert that talks about technical skills. So that's obviously very important to this role, because basically what you're doing is you are actually the lab manager and you are responsible for these things, and you're going to teach other people about them as well. And you're going to be the dependable person who people come to perhaps to ask your advice on these things. So they want someone with good management skills and also social, because you're going to be communicating with lots of different people. You're going to be willing to break off what you're doing and help them with what they need. And it's quite different from a postdoctoral position, which is much more focused on a singular project. So that's, I would say, functional social management, this particular job.
Great. All right. Well, let's take a look at the CV, shall we?
Okay, so this is the same person, but they've just reorganized the information. And they've obviously decided to emphasize different parts of their experience. So you're the same person, you're just representing yourself in a way that is then more desirable to this particular employer in this particular role. And so again, personal profile, highly driven and dedicated scientist, adept at working independently or as a team member, engaging communicator. So you can see, problem solver, results orientated. That's okay, but there isn't really anything about the functional experience or management. So I would say possibly this isn't a brilliant profile for this particular role. And also, as I've said before, if you're going to have a covering letter, then you want to highlight those functional, social and management, maybe 1 or 2 examples from each area of your experience. And that's what you then put into the CV, into the covering letter. So you could even get rid of that profile and go straight in with your education and your PhD, master's degree. I wouldn't even put very much information down about your PhD. I think just the thesis is fine and a brief description. And then below that, instead of having research experience, I would put functional or technical skills, something like that. And then you start adding in that list, and you pull out all your great functional skills that you have related to all your technical expertise.
Just under education, you'd have sort of technical skills, and then you'd have a long list of all the sort of specific scientific stuff you can do.
Everything, and especially if you can highlight the things that they want, which is obviously they're very cell culture orientated, 2D, 3D tissue culture, all those things. You could even subsection your functional skills into, molecular, and if you've got a few examples under each of those headings.
And that's so, if, presumably there's someone in an HR department somewhere with a big red pen, and they're just ticking things off, and they're going, we need someone with all of these skills. This person has them, right?
Yeah, immediately. So they go on the yes pile, and then maybe they look for more detail. You could even put those functional skills first and put your education later, because again, you could always put your name, comma, PhD, or put Dr. so-and-so, which would then they know that you were a PhD. And that's, kind of the way that you could do that. And of course, again, you've got your covering letter, but you're never quite sure whether they read the CV first or the cover letter. So probably better belt and braces, as it were.
Great. Okay. So just looking further down it, is there anything else that you would, that leaps out to you, or you would change?
Again, now this is interesting because now we have, instead of teaching, we have work experience and positions of responsibility. And so there's quite a list of different places that the person's worked, which actually could be quite useful, because if you're going to be working with lots of different people and you've got to show team working skills, and that can show, look, you know, I've worked with all these different people in different settings. You know, so I mean, the only thing I would say is, I think the targeted CV, which is the one that I was talking about in my previous recording, is to take the kind of skills that they're looking for. So, for example, team working and communication. And you take these work experiences and all the experiences that you have. I can see that if you scroll down, there's this, is it Fashion Co Limited, events?
Yep. Again, I think
there's quite a lot of wide and varied experience here, and it looks a little bit messy, like, oh, now you're this and now you're that, and there's no real consolidation. So what you could do, you can list all those pieces of experience, but what you want to do is what you actually did in the job, which demonstrates experience of your communication skills or your team working, is to take from all those different bits of experience and put them into the same section. And again, with the management, there's lots of different examples of management here, but they all come from different places. And so rather than the person who's looking at it trying to figure it all out for themselves, you take that, put it in the section, list your work experiences, but just very, very briefly as a little list, so that people can see where that experience came from. So then what you've done is you've got on your front page 1 of your CV, your education, followed by your functional skills, followed by your communication and collaboration or team working, which fall over the page onto the second page, and then you put your management. Then you list your work experience in a list, and you could even get more of that onto page 1 if you moved your education and put it on page 2, and then everything would move up, and you'd maybe have all those functional, management and social skills on the front page.
And so the key thing with this CV as a whole then is just to make sure that you've got all those skills out in front of your employer first and foremost. Everything that they're pretty specifically asking for in terms of personality, you know, in terms of, you know, working with other people and that kind of thing, but also the scientific skills. And then after that, give your kind of background and other strengths after you've kind of addressed that immediate requirement for technical skills. Is that right?
Yeah, because the technical skills are the things that are directly relevant, and you're in that same work environment. And I mean, even the management things that you've done and the social things, it's better to list the things that you've done in the context of that environment before you start talking about maybe other examples that you have from other areas and other work environments.
All right, I think that's it for this CV. Let's move on to our second person with our first job description. And I'm back with Sarah Blackford talking about CVs and job descriptions. Sarah, we've got another very quick job description up ahead of us for a postdoctoral role, and then we're going to go into a second person's CV on how they have or haven't addressed the requirements of this postdoc. So first of all, you know, tell me about this job description.
Okay, so I think this is quite a functional and investigative type of role. So it's a postdoctoral fellowship, but it's quite different from the one that we looked at earlier, which is very much more investigative focused. This very much talks about improving labeling techniques and talking about radiochemical development and the chelators, protein chemistry, making use of the unique instrument park and using these molecular imaging, and so on. So that is very functional, but I have to say, very different to the job that we looked at before, because this is about improving and developing and obviously researching and looking at ways to improve and develop these techniques. So as I said before, you know, don't be put off if it is a functional role. Just make sure that you get, you know, you are exposed to the investigative side as a postdoc, because a postdoc position is very different to a PhD. You know, you're a staff member now. So I think that is how the CV should be focused now, on these key areas that are obviously requirements of this job.
Sarah, what are your sort of immediate thoughts? I mean, the thing that struck me when I opened this is it's really pretty. It's got these sort of yeah, different font. It's all sans serif, so there's none of those. It doesn't look quite as formal as a previous CV we look at. It's run over 2 columns, and we've got these little logos here, which are quite cute. I like them. Well, I mean, what do you think?
I agree. I absolutely agree. I think this is much easier on the eye. It's much better laid out. It looks attractive. And it's a bit different, isn't it, to the ones that you see normally. So I think
Right.
on the first glance, I would be attracted then to look at this in more detail. So then I would be looking for, okay, does this person have what I need? And I would see radiochemistry there immediately, in chemistry, and they would be keywords that I would be looking for if I was wanting this postdoc in my lab. And medical imaging sciences, well, it does ask for somebody who's also got a strong background in medical sciences or medicinal sciences. So again, ticking all the boxes. Research experience, awards and grants, and training skills. So these are all very investigative. They're academic type subheadings, aren't they, or headings. So this is very investigative on the front page. So I'll then turn the page, and then we'll see that it goes into different territory here. And it very much then focuses on management and public engagement, responsibilities like student representative, writing experience, and public engagement. So then it turns into quite an artistic, social CV on the back. And I think if I was an academic, I would have looked at the front and thought, brilliant, and I would have turned the page, and I would have been quite surprised that suddenly that all this public engagement would have suddenly appeared. And I know a lot of PhD students do get involved in public engagement, and that's absolutely fine. But I think what you have to think about, if you're going to be applying for a postdoctoral position, the amount of space that you take up on your CV with your public engagement, if you're going to put a whole, almost a page of this experience, then that might send out little sort of alarm bells to the academic who may, think, oh, this person perhaps is using the postdoc position to further their science communication experiences. I mean, I'm not saying they would definitely do that, but it could be an impression that they get. So what I would recommend.
What I felt actually with this is because this education section is so short. All it's got is kind of the degree. It doesn't have any kind of skills, and then when you go down into research experience, but there is more information there about what was actually done. Those specific skills, but still not so much when you compare it with that previous CV we looked at. This feels quite light on those specific technical skills, relatively speaking. I mean, I still don't understand an awful lot of it.
No, me neither. But I think what they've done is they've missed a trick here, because they have actually got this experience of the pet. Look, if you look at training skills and you look down the bottom of the page on the right-hand column, you'll see experience planning images, studies, and using micro PET CT systems, which is exactly what they're looking for in here, and it's hidden down there. And so this, these are mistakes that people can make, and I think you're dead right that because it's in these 2 columns, it's actually detracted from them writing longer sentences, and it's made them sort of pull back and only sort of really give a snapshot of what they've done. So I would probably suggest to this person that really they've got to expand this across the page, because things like improving, developing, and leading on these projects is so important. So for example, for the PhD project, they just say synthesis of new chemicals for cell imaging, radio in vitro labeling. What does that mean? What did you do? What was your involvement? And I need to know more. So this needs to be expanded out more to investigative and functional at the expense of this public engagement. So you would reduce that down, and you would fill up with far more on things like, the presentational experience is fine, because there were some poster presentations, more academic. Maybe there's some papers from this work that need to be included as well. So it just is too brief.
Okay, thank you. While we're here, is there anything else you'd like to mention, or should we move on to that second job position?
No, I think that's fine. I think what you were right, though, that under education, PhD in radiochemistry, maybe you want to put a bit more information in, but it is expanded on under research experience, and that's a nice way to do it, where you don't put too much into the educational side of, and you expand it. It's just that they haven't expanded it enough. for this
Okay.
CV.
And actually, on that, would you include links or anything like that? So I wonder, you know, if
Absolutely, yes. And not only to ResearchGate, but I know when you're in the data business nowadays, there's one called GitHub as well, and various places where if you can have a portfolio of any kind, which expands your profile, then yes, definitely. And you could put the information. I can see that where the personal information is, there could have been a link to ResearchGate or to LinkedIn there.
Great, thank you. All right, excellent. Let's move on to that second job description then. So this is our fourth job description of today, and the last one we're looking at. This one is for science communication officer at a museum, and we're going to look at that same individual who we just looked through their postdoctoral CV. We're going to have a look at their science communication CV. So Sarah, here's the job description. Do you want to talk us through it briefly?
Yeah, well, it's highly artistic from my, hexagon of the 6 different categories, definitely about turning science into an accessible language for the public and creating exhibits. And so that's very artistic. It's also management, because actually, look, assisting with the programs, also having to plan and deliver events, so evidence of management skills. And then, of course, investigative, because you've still got to keep up with the science. So you've still got to keep up, not with the in-depth area of your research, but across, broad scientific information. So
when you say management, there, you mean kind of project management skills, right? And those kind of, yeah,
not the kind of managing people, but really sort of managing in a team, planning, delivering, working to deadlines, that kind of thing. Yeah. And so,
right.
Look, a postgrad qualification in science or science communication is desirable, and practical experience, so directly relevant experience in science communication, ability to undertake research, keep up to date with the latest science. So that's why they'd be interested in someone with a PhD, more so perhaps because you've been in the scientific field for an extra 4 years, maybe on top of somebody with a degree, and then these excellent communication skills, and that is both oral and written, and then excellent interpersonal skills. So it's all about communication, and not to your own peers, but to the public. And so it's more artistic in that respect. But you're having to manage and deliver to deadlines and deliver projects. So you're very team orientated.
Great. Okay. Let's go straight into a CV then, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So here we are. This is it. So again, this is the same individual. We looked at their CV earlier. They've refitted their CV to fit that public engagement position. What do you think?
Well, I think it's interesting, this, because it's only a 1-page CV, this. And that's fine. I would say that I would usually say 2 pages, but this is a nice example of how you could change your CV into a 1-pager. And that might be useful, even if you want to load it onto LinkedIn or something. Now, interestingly, there seems to be more on public engagement on the academic CV than there is on this one. And it's interesting, isn't it, that I think a lot of people who do a PhD get into science communication, and they really find it stimulating and perhaps even more interesting than their own project. And sometimes they even get carried away and want to get involved in this. There's so many things you can do. And so this person has obviously got well into it. And I think possibly they are applying for postdoc positions as a sort of fallback, but actually they really would like to get into science communication. So I would say that I think they've sold themselves a bit short on this CV, that I would not necessarily put education on the top left-hand corner, because that's where your eye goes when you first look at somebody's CV. It goes there. So put the most important thing there, put the public engagement there first. And it's great that they've used those words that match exactly what the the job involves. But it could be science communication, and then you could even have subsections. So you have science communication, you could have public engagement, and then there might be other types of delivery that you've done. You could split it up into where you've communicated with the public or with schools, or where you've written, they're saying written and oral presentations, so you could do a mixture of those. So you could really expand on that. Skills and responsibilities here, you know, saying that they're an ambassador and all these other things, that really all comes under science communication. So I would make a big heading of science communication and then subsection it into public engagement, and then maybe writing and oral, you know, so that they really show that they, I mean, if they've been involved in festivals or any particular types of communication, say why, which audiences as well. So be very specific. I mean, I have to say here, it is good that they've said, you know, organized 6 evening events, hosted 5 events, you know, talking to the public, but use quantities, say where they were, bring it to life. And that's where I think, you know, you could probably keep it on 1 page, but I think, you know, really reduce down the education. Just don't need to know much there at all. You know, it's not necessarily relevant. It's just that you're a scientist, you know.
I mean,
so
it's already
down for about half of the size it is now.
I mean, there's already like there's not all that much specific information. I think it's just made of the format, right? Because of these enormous headings and the and the institution names and things like that, it ends up taking up an awful lot of space. Whereas if you used a similar sort of format to maybe what you used in the public engagement here, with those sort of more simple bolding with less line breaks, maybe that would kind of halve the space of this information.
Yeah, I mean, you could actually, I think you're right, you could achieve a 1-page CV with this. You would take out those awards and grants because they're just not relevant at all. I mean, it's a shame, isn't it, where you sort of say, oh, you know, I mean, the public engagement grant, I would put that in because it's relevant, but the others, it's not necessary really. So take it out and use the space to expand on the relevant sections, which is your public engagement and what has been called skills and responsibilities.
Okay.
The references don't necessarily need to be there, but I think it's good that there's a communication specialist, there's a public engagement manager, so you don't have to use your supervisor. If you're moving away from research, you can use people that, even if you've been volunteering with them, or, you know, even if you just work with them for a few weeks, they can still definitely vouch for you.
Great, thank you. And one thing I noticed with this, I'm just looking at that skills and responsibility section. I mean, there are no skills in there really, strictly. You know, there's nothing that talks about, I don't know, you know, there's the kind of specific chemical skills you might have for a chemistry job, for instance. It's all kind of just, it's kind of other bits of experience that don't appear to fit anywhere else.
It's true. Almost as if they couldn't think of a subheading for that. So yeah, try to be more specific. So as I said before, you know, you've got things like where, you know, you're showing that you've got management skills. Well, look here, there's one where the person was an organizer, you know, and I see the word organized. So that is definitely something that will really stand out. So you can have, you know, management and organizational experience, and then pull out when you've organize these events, and then you've got the public engagement, which is when you actually communicated at them and, you know, designed or, you know, recreated the science. So, you know, these subheadings are much more relevant so that people see familiar words, because you can guarantee there'll be people out there who will be doing, you know, this kind of on the side as well as their PhD, and if they get their words more accurate, it may mean that you don't get on the yes pile and they do. So just bear in mind that, you know, you're up against the competition as well.
Great, thank you. Anything else we need to run through on this one?
I think it's a great example of where you've probably got a portfolio. You know, you've probably maybe got some experience and examples of your writing and things. So do put in links, hyperlinks on your CV, and people can click through and see more.
Great, thanks very much. So that was mine and Sarah's session running through some CVs. Thanks again to those people who sent in their CVs for allowing us to go through them like that. We really do appreciate it, and I hope you guys all got something out of it. We're now going to go into a quick question and answer session live with myself and Sarah.